Good evening and welcome to the Taco Society Presents. I'm here with the crew, the regular gang. Gardner, Sydney, Phil. We're here at least once a month. We're going to try to make it more than once a month. Hopefully twice a month. Sometimes three times a month. How many times a month does that make? 1, 2, 3.
Every day.
Every day. We're never going to let you go.
We're just going to hang out here every day.
That's right, in the crypt.
We talked about Anthicon. We've talked about Nikon and the great time we had at Anthicon.
Oh, blast.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
It was a lot of fun. It was great. And some of us are heading to Nikon in a couple weeks, and that should be a good time.
Yeah, it's a great time.
But we've got a lot of good things ahead coming up. Actually, in July, we've got 4 interviews with 4 different horror authors that we're personally picking to bring on the show and to showcase our favorites, or people that we really enjoy talking to. And I know 2 of us seem to have our authors picked out and ready to go. And
I do.
you do and I do. And we're waiting for these other 2 guys to step up to the plate.
Okay, it's going to be a secret.
But today, we're going to concentrate on the Blank Page, which is a writers group from Goffstown, New Hampshire. We're going to keep it local instead of talking about horror. So without further ado, we're going to segue right into the interviews and the readings. We're here with another segment with a member from the Blank Page Society. This is Dan Szczesny.
Good job.
Thank you. Dan is an author of fiction and nonfiction. And we'll go a little bit into what his books are, but there's one right here, The Adventures of Buffalo and Tough Cookie, which is different stories about him traveling the mountains of New Hampshire, is it? Or
New Hampshire, yeah, New
Okay.
Hampshire.
The Nepal Chronicles, and he'll go on about that. His wife is from Nepal, and he's got some great stories about traveling there. And finally, a book of fiction, short stories. And that's his latest offering, and he'll talk to us about Sing, his latest release.
Yes, I will. Thank
Yeah.
you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure.
And
What's it like?
congrats on the new show.
Oh, thank you. What's it like to be in this graveyard with the
Yeah, it is. It is kind of
tombstones?
peculiar. I think the sign is right above my head, if I'm not mistaken.
It is.
isn't
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't write ghost stories or supernatural or anything like that, but I'm happy to be here. It's a little scary.
Great.
I'll try not to
Great.
frighten anyone.
Yeah. Our last show, we had a couple of guests that did not do that
Yeah,
well.
right. I was the last.
Yeah.
Poor Yorick. I knew
You
him.
knew him well.
There is no empty grave waiting for you.
Well, we'll see how I do.
Okay.
Oh, when we go for breaks, we have to go to the bathroom. You're the newest member of the Blank
Yes.
Page, I think.
Yeah. Well, there was a. I guess the newest member who stayed.
Who stays?
How about that?
The newest continuous
There
member.
you go.
You're also the moderator. You were
Yeah.
appointed by the library to
Yeah.
moderate the group.
Yeah.
Why don't you just give us your thoughts on the Blank Page and extend an invitation to anybody that wants to come on?
Yes. Well, I had done a couple of events at the Goffstown Library, and I'm friends with Sandy. One of the librarians over there. So I guess my last event came during a period where the one moderator was leaving, and they were on the search for a new moderator. And they just simply approached me. They knew that I had been published, and I've been 25 years in journalism, and I've moderated groups before. And they said, we can't pay you, but it's an interesting group, and it's been around for a long time, and we want someone to direct them to publish. They're very interested in their group being published working writers, which is what I am, and which is what I'm very interested in. So I said, yeah, sure, I'll give it a try. It's only once a month. It's not that much of my time or that much of my effort, and it's a great group of writers, as we've just seen, or maybe if this is the second show, maybe as we've seen last week, who includes yourself. Why aren't you coming to the group, by the way?
I thought this
next month you're going to come.
That sounds like a pretty good idea.
Well, we've got Phil coming, so
Yeah.
coming to the next
I'll be peeking over the stacks.
meeting. Yeah.
So we're always on the lookout
Yeah.
for new members. I would love to get young, beginning starting out writers, even high school age writers. It doesn't matter, because I think the whole point of the group, the whole point of any writers group, in my opinion, is to get a whole bunch of writers together and encourage each other. Because Lord knows we're in an industry that we need to encourage each other. And to have some new, bright, young talent coming and working with them, and I'd love to, hold their hand and explore some great new voices. And I know that they're there because this area is rich with
It is.
with talent.
And I'll go into it a little bit later with you, but yeah, I mean, it's done wonders for me, just having a group of people taking the time to read what you wrote, to critique, and to encourage you means the world, means
Yeah.
the world to a young writer.
Yeah.
Gard, you've got some questions.
Yeah. There's so many questions. We're going to fetch the comfy chair.
Not the comfy chair.
Not the comfy chair. We're going to talk all
No,
Monty
we're gonna talk
Python.
Monty Python. Forget it, Tony. We've decided to talk Monty Python.
It's a
today.
special Monty Python segment of the program, folks.
Will you do a Monty Python segment? You can have
Blue,
it.
Yes.
not yellow.
Yeah, blue, not yellow. What's your favorite color? Blue, no yellow. Okay, yeah, it's interesting because as we were just chatting before the program, asking you how you would describe yourself as a writer, journalistic writer, nonfiction writer, creative nonfiction writer, now writing fiction. How would you describe yourself? And if you could explain to people maybe a little bit of the difference between one form of writing and another form of writing would be terrific. If you might talk about a little bit of your background and then how you developed into starting to do fiction.
Yeah. Well, I've been asked. It's a little challenging when you have a lot, when you write a lot of different. I have 3 books now. 2 are nonfiction, very different nonfiction, and 1 is fiction. So I'm often asked when I do library presentations or interviews or whatever, what type of writer are you? How should I introduce you?
Mm-hmm.
And I always say, just introduce me as a writer, because that's what I want to be. I have 25 years of journalism experience. I started as a journalist, and that's been my whole career. So my career as a journalist has been to write about everything. I could technology, IT, geography, interviews, politics. I've written about it all. So what I prefer is to not be pigeonholed. In fact, we were just talking earlier about, I just actually had a fantasy short story.
Yeah.
I wrote a fantasy. It was the first time since high school.
Yeah, I love that.
That was actually accepted in an anthology. So I want, as a professional writer, as someone who does this for a living every day, what I want to be able to do is write about anything. And just pick it up and write about anything. And I think my 20 years of journalism has helped me do that. And it helps you become sort of I know a little bit about a lot of things.
Multi-didactic.
But I'm not an expert in anything, but I know a little bit about a lot of things.
It's fascinating too because you have to be interested in a lot of different things.
What I'm most interested in is learning new things.
Yeah.
I mean, what I'm an expert at is finding people who can talk to me about something I don't know about. That's like sort of the definition of a good reporter, right? Is I don't know anything about some new medical procedure, but
Sure.
but if I have the skill to be able to find someone who does, and then I can translate that into a wider audience for whoever I happen to be writing for.
That's a skill that I think many fiction writers wish they had, to
Yeah.
be able to have had a background where they went out and got that information and pulled it in, and that's fascinating. to
Oh,
me.
and it's totally connected too.
It
It's
is.
totally connected,
Yeah.
fiction to fiction with the nonfiction. Yeah.
I think a lot of people who write fiction, they say, look, don't just read fiction, read nonfiction.
Yeah.
Look at those great turns of phrase of a terrific essayist or
Yeah.
something like that. Let's talk a little bit about some of your traveling, okay? How does a trip translate into good material for a book? And as a person who's written about some of his trips, did you look at a writing assignment as the trip first, or did you say I've got a trip and I'm going to get, or is it
Yeah.
both?
I'm a workhorse writer. What I have always done is live my life and then find someone who will buy the story about it.
Awesome.
So we've never, my wife is a traveler and we're both backpackers and hikers and we've done a lot of things together and separately. And I love traveling and I love exploring new cultures, but I'm also a writer and this is what I do for a living. So whenever we have, my strategy is once a trip is planned, then I look for a market. And that has always been how I've done it. And with the 2 books, Well, the first book was a complete accident. We can talk about that later. But I wasn't writing a book. I was hiking with my foster daughter, and a publisher came to me because I had a little blog which I was writing some of the details of it, and he said, "Hey, what you're doing is really interesting, and I'm looking for authors in 2013. Would you be willing to put this together in a book?" So he came to me. With Nepal, I knew there was going to be a book when on the trip. So during the trip, I was actually taking notes and marking chapters and getting ready for when I got home. I knew I was going to write the book.
And just to mention again, The Adventures of Buffalo and Tough Cookie, about hiking in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
The Nepal Chronicles, about your trip to Nepal.
Yep.
And
I was married in Nepal, too.
that is amazing, of course, with what has happened in Nepal
Right.
recently. It's really brought it to a lot of people's attention, what that area
Then we're
is
going
like.
back in October to check on some of the damage. We have family and friends who live in Kathmandu, so we're going to go back there and just see if we can help. I do some Nepal Chronicles events around libraries, and you can go to my website, by the way, and I have an events site tab on the website. Are you going to delete that out? Can I do that? This isn't
what's the-
NPR, right?
what's the
I can
website?
promote.
Yeah.
It's just danczesny.com, my first name, last name.com. And at my events, I'm actually taking up we're taking up a little collection for when we do go back in October. There was actually a school in a little town outside of Kathmandu called Namche Bazaar that was just demolished in the earthquakes, and we're going to donate whatever money we collect to that school.
That's great.
So, and it's a direct, it's a direct line. People know. I mean, and even like $5 goes translated to rupees is a lot of money.
Yeah.
So, people. If you don't want to donate to like Red Cross, or if you don't know the charity, but you want to help, that whatever you give me, even if it's a couple of bucks, is going to go literally directly into the hands of rebuilding the school.
It's
That'll be
fascinating. Some of the richest conversations people have, I think, is learning experiences that someone else has had on a journey or something like that. What are some of the most memorable images you have? And what's terrific is to be able to talk to somebody who can verbalize it and articulate it in a way in writing that you can keep it and you can refer back to it any time.
And the reader has that picture in
Yeah.
mind,
Yeah.
which they never have. If you've
Yeah.
never been to Nepal, you read the Nepal Chronicles, you get a pretty good understanding of what it's like, what's
Yeah.
going on, and it's invaluable. And a
Absolutely.
good writer could do that.
Well, let's talk also about Sing. Your newest book is
Mhm.
Sing, and it's a collection of short stories.
Yep, literary fiction.
Literary
Yep.
fiction. Could you tell people the difference or what the term literary fiction means?
Yeah, well, there's no vampires or zombies.
That'll come. That'll come. You'll find as you get more seasoned, you get a
I'll-
reputation.
right,
it'll
right.
It'll be
come.
Mapley's zombies, Mapley's vampires. Who knows?
I suppose I could also say, if you ask me that question again, I could also say the difference is I don't make any money off of literary fiction as opposed to writing about vampires.
Well,
So either way you look at
if
it,
your vampires glitter, then you're okay.
Yeah,
You know what?
I know.
If the characters in your literary fiction glitter, maybe that'll
Yeah,
work.
yeah,
Who knows?
yeah.
Who knows?
So it's non-genre fiction. It's not science fiction or horror or westerns. It's just straight up. Real. I don't want to say real life because I don't know exactly how to non-genre fiction.
Yeah.
I
That's a
guess
good way to
is-
describe it.
Non-genre.
is how to put it.
When you were younger, had you written that type of material as well? Did you start just mainly on the nonfiction? And how does one look at possibly how one can contribute to the other? Say being a
Yeah.
nonfiction writer and traveling and things like that.
When I was younger, I started writing in sixth grade, and sixth grade, high school, college, I was horror and science fiction. That's all I read, and that's all I wrote.
Yeah.
I'm a Star Blazers. And
Oh,
I'm a huge
Star
Star Trek fan.
Blazers.
Remember Star Blazers?
Oh man, Fire the Wave motion.
That was
gun.
my very first short story. Was a rip-off of Star Blazers, right down to the battleship, spaceship, and the captain and the whole thing. That was my first short story. Star. I love
Space
Star
Cruiser
Blazers.
Yamato.
Yeah,
Space
yeah.
Cruiser,
Fire the Wave motion gun. yeah.
Fire the Wave motion
So
gun.
I read Edgar Rice Burroughs and Isaac Asimov and
Oh, yeah.
all those Bradbury, all those guys that
Yeah.
you would expect
Yeah.
to read and to write. And then in college I took English Lit, and then I majored in English literature, and then I got I mastered in 19th century British novel.
Oh wow.
So yeah, there's a making career right there. So I was sort of steeped in literary fiction. So coming out of college, I was steeped in literary fiction. That's when I started writing. And the two things, and one becomes the other, right? Because like a lot of the, I don't believe that fiction comes from nowhere. I'm not one of those writers who can just like pop things into my head out of nothing.
Mm-hmm.
It has to come from some experience or some image or some sentence or some person or something that was in my life.
Yeah.
And since I travel so much, and since I'm mostly a travel writer, a lot of the stories in Sing come from ideas garnered from those journeys. For example, we did a month-long trip into Alaska, my wife and I, a couple of years ago, and we in Alaska is like going to another planet. It's not the United States. It's a totally different place, and you can pull off the side of the road, and you can picnic along. There's giant mountains everywhere, and there's no, it never gets dark, and so we were like camping by lakes and stuff, and you get around by bush plains mostly. So we're by this lake, and this bush plane landed right in front of us, literally like right, and sort of taxied over to the shore, and we're just having lunch, and this guy got out of this beautiful bright red plane. And while we were watching, we were like, why is he landing? What is he, does he have a house here? And there's nothing around, there's no houses. And he gets out of the plane, and he goes to a tree because he needs to go to the bathroom.
He got down so he could go.
He had to land the plane so he could go to the bathroom. and that image stuck with me, that idea of this bush pilot, what they have to do. And when I got home, I saw a documentary on bush pilots, on Alaskan bush pilots. And one of their jobs is when the tribal villages who are out of the only way you can reach some of these tribal villages in the tundra is by a plane.
Yeah.
And when someone dies in the tribal village, the only way that they can get to their sort of traditional burial spot is in a plane.
Oh.
So one of the bush pilots' jobs is to fly coffins.
Wow.
And the story Little Warriors came out of that image.
Is that what you're going to
idea.
read for us
And that's
today?
what I'm going to read. Yeah.
What?
And that is, and we'll remind people it's in Sing.
Yeah.
And that's in Sing and Other Stories, and other
Okay.
short stories.
This is great, and these are all available online. People.
Amazon, my website, Barnes & Noble, or a local bookstore. Gibson's Bookstore in Concord is one of my favorite bookstores.
River Run. there's
River
one,
Run, yeah, they're all, they're you can be available anywhere.
And you can see Dan at many events
Yeah,
throughout the state.
I'm all over the place. If you look hard enough, you'll get sick of me.
Great. Let's hear some reading.
All right, cool. So I'm going to start with that story, actually, Little Warriors, and then I think I'll read a little from Nepal Chronicles, if that's okay.
Sounds great.
All right, Little Warriors. The slat does not retract. Lucy Leigh pulls the knob again and waits for the comforting bang that signifies her helio speed is dropping, but nothing. Come on, girl, not now. A sharp crosswind jams the plane hard, causing the engine to sputter. Not much of a blip, but to Lucy that sound might as well be a death knell. She'd expected the storm. Her plane is designed for weather just like this, low vis, icy sleet. Just slow the plane down, make her easier to handle. Get closer to the tundra and fly in under the wind. She curls her fore and middle fingers under the knob, counts to 3, and yanks again. Nothing. In frustration, she pulls hard on the knob again and again, nearly tearing it out of the control panel. Hell's kitchen! A chunk of hail the size of a golf ball hits the plane's windshield and sprays ice over the fuselage, causing her to jump. Lucy grabs the radio and pushes the call button. Koyuk, this is Helio 039er. I have a non-operative slat. Repeat, a turbulence hits the plane so hard the mic is knocked out of her hand. Her restraints keep her from floating out of her seat as the plane loses altitude. The red ground speed light clicks on. I'd slow you down if I could, Lucy says to the flashing button, but that ain't happening right now. She stretches her neck to look out the side window, trying to get her bearings. But the rain and ice exploding against her plane like popcorn kernels are making it impossible to see anything. She got caught too high. Now dead reckoning is impossible unless she can find the Yukon River. And without functional slats to slow the plane, she's literally out of control in a cloud. Come on now, girl, how hard can this be? Lucy's been flying for Alaska Air for 6 years. This plane, her plane, the Little Warrior, since the start. She hears a thump behind her. One of the latches keeping her single piece of cargo from sliding has snapped. It bangs against the back of her seat so hard it jars her head forward. It is a single coffin, a pine box. She freezes for a moment. Try to fix the box or get the plane out of the cloud. Her choice is made for her when a blast of rain shatters the window to her right, and a cold shear of wind nearly pulls the controls out of her hands. Ice stings Lucy's forehead and cheeks like pinpricks. The little warrior can no longer fight the storm. The plane tips hard left, bursts out of a cloud bank into open air, and Lucy gasps when she sees the black muck of the tundra only 100 feet below her plane. I'm sorry, my friend, Lucy says, addressing her lifeless cargo, but you ain't going to make your funeral. I might make mine, though. She tightens her harness, searches frantically for flat, open ground, and gets ready to meet the dirt.
Excellent. I've heard you reading that before, and hearing you reading it again is it just
That's awesome.
yeah, it just sent shivers down my spine. It's great.
Totally, in media res, you just drop in right in the middle of the
Yeah.
action. It's present tense.
Yeah.
You don't know what's going to happen next.
And it's like present tense third person too, which is really hard for me because we talked about in one of my meetings, I tend to write in first person present tense and not third person present tense. And third person present tense is really complicated.
It's much more difficult. In first person, I think you have the ability to offer expressions and
Right.
things that might be a little bit more vernacular,
Right.
and in third person, it's a little more formal.
Yeah, and
It's
right,
just a
and
different-
I mean, when you're writing an adventure story, like, because my whole idea was this sort of a Jack London type adventure story, is you don't formality isn't about adventure stories, isn't
Yeah.
about survival stories.
Yeah. Oh, that's
so thank
great.
you, cool.
You got something else?
Yeah,
for
I'm
us?
going to read a section from the Nepal Chronicles. It's nonfiction, so this does require a bit of a setup. After Kathmandu, for our honeymoon, we actually spent a month and a half in the Himalayas trekking to Mount Everest Base Camp. And we were unguided and unportered, which meant we carried our own gear and we weren't part of a commercial trekking group. So we stayed in Sherpa homes and tea houses and things like that. So what I want to read is the morning that we finally set off for base camp. We're at about 17,000 feet now, and the trekking is very hard and it's very cold. And this is sort of our final push to base camp. A long, aching groan fills the air. It sounds like something is coming up from the earth to swallow us. The groan is followed by a sharp crack, 1,000 iron hammers hitting 1,000 anvils. The glacier moves like a living thing, a constantly writhing 8-mile snake made of ice and rocks. It makes thunder. The Khumbu is alive, and we are tiny, walking on its narrow spine, a good half-mile upslope from the ice. It's like walking on a sleeping monster. A minuscule shift in the ice, someplace out of sight, creates massive shifts above, and that energy explodes with the force of an earthquake. Here on this ridge, we can feel the glacier move and hear it crack, and it makes us want to move faster, to avoid angering it. But we can't. In fact, we can barely move at all. We are at 17,000 feet and ascending, and it's like walking in glue. The 3-mile hike from Gorab Shep to base camp is not technical. It should not be difficult under normal circumstances. But this place is far from anything that we would ever call normal. We are so far beyond our comfort zone. We are specks floating on the top of the world. We are nothing here, and we are all that we have. I'm beyond words. Meenakshi and I share little because we can't afford the energy, but we can feel it, the power of this place. The glacier speaks again, and we stop to listen. Someplace from high on Nuptse or on the other side or in Tibet, for all we know, a miles-wide crevasse opens and an avalanche comes tumbling down, and we can feel the rumble in our bones and under our feet. We scan the ridges for plumes of white but can see none. I'm trying to understand my place here. In between the upset stomach, the shifting weather, the porters coming and going, I work hard to be in the moment, to attain some level of mindfulness, as the Buddhists would say. The trail and the rocks and the ice and the air are the physical that is here. My amazing wife and our past and future and all the history of all who have come and all who will come swirl in my mind. Irvine, Mallory, Norgay, Taby, Mesner, Krakauer, Arnott, Vestures. We walk in their footsteps now. Tomorrow it will be our footsteps that those who come will follow. We follow history. We make history. There is no yesterday. There is no today. There is now. And right now we move silently through the swirling snowflakes, watching our time, watching our steps, and trying to watch the giant mountains all around us. A giant commercial trekking group moves past us fast, and several of their number are in distress. Meenakshi overhears a porter asking one young woman over and over if she'd like to go back. No, 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 she says again and again. Being this close, it feels like it would be far more difficult to turn around than to continue, even if continuing means pain and sickness. After a series of twists around long ridges, we come to a long straightaway, and we can see it now, tiny ant-like forms scurrying about in the high, flattish region near the icefall. It seems impossibly far away. Distance is deceiving here. A mile of space surrounded by the enormity of the Himmel appears to have no end, to be an illusion. After an unknowable amount of time, we see that the trail swoops down off the spine into a glacier gully, then back up to the edge of the icefall where base camp waits, where a dozen or more trekkers appear to be congregating. Meenakshi climbs up out of the gully ahead of me to take pictures of me coming up. Later, she'll tell me that this was the point where it became very real, where she understood that we were no longer on Earth, but on shifting ice, dozens of feet deep. I am surrounded by people, but I am alone. I savor these final steps, my breath hoarse and raw like an animal's. My poles dig roughly into the gravel and ice, and I pause near the top to see Meenakshi looking down at me, waving slowly with one hand, making a video with the other. I wave back. In a few minutes, I join her, and the two of us stride the final few feet together to base camp. There is a refrigerator-sized boulder there with doodles and scribbles of generations of trekkers. Base camp. Base camp. We've arrived at base camp.
Excellent.
Wow.
Good reading.
Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Dan.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, and you're going to get your chance, if you haven't already, to be talking to me
Oh, good.
about the blank page, and I'm going to do a little bit of an odd reading. But thank you, Gardner.
Thanks a lot for letting me come
Thank you
in.
for asking the questions. I appreciate it, man.
Absolutely. Great work. I hope people will look for the Nepal Chronicles, Adventures of Buffalo, and Tough Cookie.
Me too.
And the newest collection of fiction, Sing.
Sing.
Dun.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody, and we'll be back in a flash of electronic magic. We're back. As you gathered by now, we're interviewing people from the Blank Page, which is the writing group located here in Goffstown, New Hampshire, at the Goffstown Public Library. And what I'm going to do now is throw the interview process over to Dan, who's going to interview me, because I also happen to be a member of the Blank Page. So Dan, do your
Thank you.
worst.
Thank you, Tony. And Tony, thank you for coming on Taco Society Presents with Tony Tremblay.
Oh, yeah. I know him.
So cool. So yeah, the Blank Page. And thanks for letting me set up this segment. And I can't wait for the two of you to read. But let's talk a little bit about the Blank Page before we get to that. And why don't we just start with letting us know how you became involved with the Blank Page to begin with?
Yeah, it's been a life changer for me, to be honest with you. I can honestly say that all the stories that I've ever published, I would not have done so without the Blank Page, without their guidance, without the members taking a chance on me, basically teaching me, how to do what I should be doing.
How long have you been a member?
I want to say 6 years now. It could be a little bit longer, but I think it's 6 years. But it's funny because I always wanted to write ever since I was a little kid. And we talked about that earlier. Sydney talked about it ever since she was a little girl. She wanted to write, and so did I. And I can remember the first story I ever wrote. I was a young kid, and it was called "Spiders Ate My Face." And I wrote that. And I gave it to my dad, and my dad hated it.
Tell me you still have that.
I don't still have that.
Man.
No, my dad hated it, and I can't tell you the effect that had on me, because it really squelched any desire I had after that to write.
Oh.
So, in high school I did write a story, and I talked about that in an earlier show, but it really, it put a damper on my enthusiasm, to be honest with you. So I spent most of my adult life writing, but it was nonfiction. I wrote professional articles about my trade and did things for work. And then one day a coworker said, I saw a sign at the Goffstown Library about a writer's group, and she said, I know you love to write. Why don't you just stop by? And I said, you know what, I'm ready. I think I can do that. And I stopped in, and I met some wonderful people like Bob Perron, who you'll see or have seen already, a French professor at St. A's. There was Anne, who was the moderator before you, who was an English professor at St. A's. Kat, who was a editor and a writer, columnist at the Union Leader. Father John, a Catholic priest, who was writing his memoirs.
Oh,
and,
cool.
Oh, it was great. I mean, You never would believe the kind of life that a cat, and I'm not, it's not salacious or anything, but it was very, very interesting.
Yeah.
And we always looked forward to Father John's submissions whenever we put him in. And there were so many others, and I don't really have the time or the memory to go through them all, but I was overwhelmed. They accepted me, they made me one of their own, and they taught me that I could write. You know, they spent the time with me.
What were your, I mean, it had been a while since you had written. It sounds like your writing career almost began again with the blank page. So what did you expect walking in? What were your initial expectations?
I was afraid, to be honest with you, because I've never really written professionally except nonfiction. I did some technical articles, and I tell you, I did terrible. I was horrible. I mean, I cringe now at some of the things I wrote. So if any of you people are thinking of going down there, and if you do write something terrible, don't worry.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and people like Dan and some of the other members will take the time and teach you how to be better. But it was bad. Thank God I'm where I am now, to be honest with you. But you know, I'm going to jump a little bit. But the first full story I ever wrote was about 6 years ago, and I say full story, one that the group thought was cohesive, that made a lot of sense. I wrote it, and I got their seal of approval, and I sent it out for acceptance. First story I ever write, I send it out, the publisher comes back and says, "Tony, I love this story." And I'm like, whoa. He says, "But I want you to add to it because it's too short." It was only like 600 words. It was
Oh,
short.
geez, it was
And I
flash
go-
fiction.
It was almost flash fiction, yeah, depending on your definition. So I said, okay. I screwed it up bad. I added on to it. I was so scared. I was so nervous. Never heard from the publisher
Oh,
after that.
no.
But I kept that story and I worked on it. 6 years later, I got a call from my friend Craig Cook, who was doing the Piercing the Darkness anthology. And you'll be seeing a picture of that on one of the frames that come up. And he said, "Tony, do you have a story?" And I said, "Well, I didn't." I said, "But wait a minute. I've got the first story I ever wrote." I said, "Let me send that to you." And I sent it to him, and he loved it. He absolutely loved it. Loved the extended ending, the whole bit. And he published it. And you're talking about Lansdale. I mean, these huge names in horror.
Big names.
And my first story I ever wrote is published with all these fantastic horror and dark fiction authors. It's very, very humbling, and I,
Impressive.
I thank him and the blank page. If it wasn't for the blank page, it never would have happened.
That's cool. What tell me about some lessons that you learned from
Oh,
attending
geez.
the meeting. Let's just there's probably lots of them. Like what one jumps out?
Editing, more than anything else, whether you're a novice or whether you've been a professional, and Sydney's nodding her head, have other people look at your work, whether it's a writing group or whether it's a professional editor or somebody that knows what they're doing, another author. Somebody else besides you has to look at it. It's not your mother, it's not your brother, it's not your friends. Somebody that knows what they're doing. A good editor is worth their weight in gold. Having a friend that's a good editor is priceless. They will take the time, if they're good, they'll take the time, they'll show you what you've done wrong, they'll try to, teach you how to do it right. And we're talking grammar, we're talking punctuation, we're talking tenses. I've learned so much from the blank page, and I'm still learning. Every time I submit something, there's more red lines than there are black lines, to be honest with you. But again, I'll never stop learning, and I'm just so appreciative to what the group does for the.
It's a
does for me.
collaboration, isn't it? Writing is a collaboration.
It is. Well, it's very solitary during the process itself. I mean, some people have to tie themselves down with a rope because they have to force themselves to write. I'm not like that. You
Yeah.
guys probably aren't like that either, but some guys are. The collaborative process comes when it's finished,
Yeah.
and that's when it's so important to get somebody else to look at it. So editing would be the biggest lesson I think I've learned.
Cool. So the story that you guys are going to read, you two are going to read, sprung from the blank page.
Is that first page? Is
Okay.
that first story I ever
Oh,
wrote?
cool. So do you have any more background you want to add, or you just want to start reading?
Well, I just wanted to say the story is very short. It's only 870 words, but it does have 3 scenes that consist of internal dialogue, and they're the past tense. So what I've asked Sydney to do is to alternate with me. I'm going to read the present tense portions of the story, and I've asked Sydney to read the past tense. The story is primarily told through a woman's point of view until we get to the end, that added extra part that I told you about earlier. It's called Husband of Kelly, and it's, as I said, 870 words, so it'll go by fast. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm just reading the italics.
That's all you're doing.
Okay.
Husband of Kelly by T.T. Zuma. A solitary figure, that of a frail young woman, stood with her head bent low in the snows of old New Hampshire graveyard. Her exposed hands were sepia-tinted and numb. They trembled from a combination of the biting north winds and the weight of the cold steel resting in her arms. With glassy eyes, she once again read the inscription carved into the headstone before her. Craig Cook, husband of Kelly, 1975, 2010. The woman shuddered. Memories, blunt as rusty ice picks, punched themselves into her thoughts.
Her husband, smiling as he walked out the door, telling her not to worry, that with the new protocols enacted against the epidemic, he was guaranteed to come home to her safely. Then, hours later, when embracing him at their doorfront, she realized his return was due to instinct and not any promises he had made her.
A motion below her feet pulled her back into the present. She blinked softly and focused on the ground. It was barely perceptible at first, but yes, there it was. The snow. It was breathing. She took a cautionary step backwards and paused. And even though it was expected, when the ground in front of her erupted, she screamed. Two fists thrust up through the ground like twin volcanoes. They created a scattershot of debris that turned the surrounding snow black. The young woman stood her ground and watched the resurrection in despair as a set of arms followed the fists. Moments later, a head followed. Then the rest of her husband rose up from his grave. He stood before her, his eyes locked onto hers. The young woman stared back. She was seeking recognition, but all she found in his eyes were hunger. She braced herself and then weakly raised the shotgun that had been nestled in her frozen hands. As the woman aimed, her arms trembled, and her thoughts once more flashed back to her husband's explanation of the new protocols.
He spoke casually, telling her that newly discovered drugs managed to delay reanimation of the recent dead for 36 hours. Bodies were to be buried in a shallow grave without a coffin. When the drug wore off, someone, even if it was a relative, must be present to terminate reanimation. She saw herself nodding her head in agreement with him when he wondered, somberly, how a family member could do something so hideous to someone they loved.
The young woman's thoughts were chased away when she heard grunting. She was momentarily startled with the realization that he was calling her name. Her husband began to shuffle awkwardly towards her with his arms outstretched, his eyes wide, his mouth open and possibly wide. Sarah pulled the trigger. With tears flowing, she lowered the shotgun and mouthed the words, "I love you, Greg." Then Sarah turned slowly to face the entrance of the cemetery. Gazing at the gates, she began to speak once more. "And I love you too, Da." A second shot echoed through the graveyard, penetrating Sarah's heart and exiting through her back. Streaks of red accented the black and white palette of the gravesite. Sarah's body slipped slowly to the ground, if she were a blanket, covering and comforting her husband. A man, middle-aged and dressed in hunter's orange, lowers his high-power rifle and leans it against the cemetery fence. His shoulders sunk low to the ground, and his chest tightened as he struggled to control the sobs racking his body. Grabbing the tip of the rifle barrel and then dragging it along behind him, the man walked to his pickup truck, parked near the cemetery's entrance. The snow parted in whispers as he forced his boots ahead of him, along the covered walkway, the butt of his rifle leaving its own wake. Reaching the truck, he placed the rifle into the rack in the back seat, and then picked up a shovel that was stored in the bed. Walking towards the gravesite, he remembered the phone call from his daughter 3 years ago.
She had told him how Craig had come home early from an errand, bloodied, bitten, and incoherent. She didn't think twice about attending to his wounds and risking infection. When it was apparent that he would die soon, she had kissed her husband one last time before he passed. Only after Craig had drawn his last breath did she call him, and only to ask if he would finish this for her. And then he spoke of her mother, about how much she loved her, and how she didn't think her mother would understand what needed to be done.
As the man approached his daughter's body, only one question now occupied his thoughts. How would he tell his wife what he had done? How, she would ask. How could a father ever have done something so terrible to his own daughter? And then he wondered what his wife would say to him when he told her he would have to do it all over again, only 36 hours from now.
That was awesome.
That's awesome. Good job.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Dan, for the
You're very
interview,
welcome.
and thank you for letting me read, and thank you for reading the story with me. I appreciate that.
That was great.
Oh,
Thank you for letting me.
Thank you. And that's the end of the interviews and the readings, and we'll be back in a quick flash. That was another great show.
Yeah.
Boy, these guys are really good. It pays to join a writing group. If you want to learn how to write, you don't know where to go or who to talk to, that's the place to go. And please feel free to come, if you're in the area, come to the Goffstown Library. We meet on the second Tuesday, 6:30 to 8 o'clock. And I guess we're ready to get some tacos, aren't we?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Monster
Exactly.
tacos.
Monster Tacos. Thanks again, everybody. It was a great show. I couldn't ask for better people to work with. Thank you very much. And thank you.